King Newfalter, welcome to Irish Granny Tarot. It's time for our Saturday book, and we are on video number 3 of A Talent to Deceive, the search for the real killer of the Lindbergh baby by William Norris. This is video number 3. We had achieved the beginning of chapter 12 by the end of video 2 last Saturday. I got a lot of positive feedback about this book. People really like having a little departure from politics, pretty much. Although, somehow or other, the Nazis seem to get into everything. It's just astounding. However, this is a little bit of a difference and a little bit of an escape, and people seemed interested in maybe doing more things like this. So if you've got suggestions, let me know. I don't necessarily want to talk about crimes that haven't been adjudicated. Like allegedly this guy did it, but I don't want to do that. Other than that, all of it is just a walk in the park compared to political controversy. So chapter 12, the family attempts to move on. By June of 1932, the Lindberghs were not at the beginning of the headlines every single day. There was a lot of political turmoil going on in 1932. So there were assassinations in Japan and in Paris. There was the Depression. And there had been an increase in crime in the U.S. because of the economic situation. They were sending 3 murderers a week to the electric chair. That's astounding. Lynching was common in the South, I regret to say. By August, the Lindberghs had their second son, and the couple immediately, which blows my mind, left the baby with Betty and Anne's mother, Betty being the nanny, and Anne's mother, and flying across the Atlantic frequently. They were globetrotting all the time. Which reminds me, if you haven't had the opportunity to watch the video I made with Deborah Lupien, we channeled a number of people involved in the Lindbergh case, and it was a revelation. So they spent more than 2 months in Europe. They went to banquets and the opera. They met with kings and presidents, and they were followed hot on their heels by the press. When and where they went was often determined by the vagaries of the weather conditions because they flew. And they were sponsored by the head of Pan Am, so they didn't have to pay for anything. They were asked by Pan Am to go fly over South America to sort of push air travel, make it appealing to the public. They arrived in New York City after 5 months and 10 days, 29,781 miles across 4 continents. Imagine leaving your new baby for 5 months. Lindbergh wasn't interested in the hunt for the kidnapper. They bowed out of the whole controversy and just took off. But the police now, the FBI, were still trying. And Governor Moore of New Jersey offered a $25,000 reward for information capture and finding him guilty. They published the serial numbers of the ransom money. And over 8 months, they found only 27 individual bills of the money. And they were able to trace them, but they were tracing them to where they were used to pay. And they were all places with hundreds and hundreds of customers a day. And of course, no CCTVs in those days. They even offered a reward for finding any ransom money. And, not just for information about the kidnappers, but where could we get more of the money? And nobody responded. The United States went off the gold standard, and nobody was supposed to have more than $100 in any of the gold standard bills that were still in circulation. They were supposed to be taken out of circulation. So they were on the lookout for these ransom money gold certificates. And they started to show up. It began as a trickle, but then it became a flood. And the largest month went to J.J. Faulkner, who was once a guy who once accused Dwight Morrow of swindling him of $50,000. $50,000 ransom demand. The baby disappears. Who shows up with some of the ransom money? But a guy that had been on the outs with Morrow over $50,000. His name was really J.J. Rosovitsky, and in 1938, he made himself scarce. He dropped out of sight. Most of what little of the ransom money that showed up at all showed up in Manhattan. It was believed the kidnappers sold the ransom money for pennies on the dollar just to get rid of it and still have money. And they sold it for 40 cents per dollar. And they believed that they sold it to people in the underworld. So, yeah, maybe this guy had his hands on the money, but what did that really mean? Because he was kind of an underworld character. Chapter 13, Unlikely Scapegoat. Born in 1899 along the Czech border, a young man who was the youngest of 5 children, Bruno Hauptmann. Now, this story is confusing for so many reasons, not the least of which is the governor is Hoffman and the alleged perpetrator is Hauptmann. I'll try to make a distinction. Maybe I'll just, from moving forward, I think I'll just call him Bruno, and that'll help. He apprenticed as a carpenter for 14 years, like serious carpentry skills. And he tried to join the military in 1915. He would have been, maybe 15 and a half, 16 years old, and he was too young. They would not take him. He began studying mechanical engineering. But in 1918, he aged in. He was called up. 2 of his brothers had died in the war. His sister had gone to America, and his father was dead. So he didn't have all that much to leave besides his mother. So he was sent to the Western Front, was slightly wounded, and at the end of the war, he had been removed from battle to recuperate from this wound. In 1919, life in Germany was grim. Food, clothes, work, all were scarce. The Germans were really forced to make amends for this war and pay reparation, and it sent the entire country into penury. Bruno got a job as a mechanic in a coal mine, but got fired when he was late to work. Now, this is, there were no worker protections. He took the train to work every day. His train was late, so he was late for work and they fired him. So with a friend, he was cold and hungry and broke, and he and the friend began a life of petty crime. They did burglaries to eat. He was arrested for robbing 2 women at gunpoint, so not good. And he escaped on the way to trial, but gave up 2 days later, just out of desperation. And he was found guilty and spent 3 years in prison, but he proved to be a model prisoner. He got out, but he had no work, and once again, he was arrested in June of 1923 for theft. He escaped again. He's like an escape artist. It's kind of fascinating. He escaped again, but he became quite obvious to him. He had no future in Germany. He could not immigrate legally because he'd been in prison. And so therefore he had no money. So therefore he stowed away on a ship. So at first, when he got onto the ship, he sneaked on and he hid by the boiler. And, excuse me. But he got bored and he began to roam around the boat. And one of the crew members saw him and invited him to sit at the crew table to eat. He, for himself, wandering around, found an empty cabin and, made himself at home. But one day, wandering around, an officer on the deck asked to see his ticket, and the captain sent him to crew quarters and made him stay there, like guarded him there. And he could spend the rest of the voyage sunbathing, but he wasn't free. He was in trouble. So he was taken by launch to Ellis Island for deportation back to Germany. He jumped out of the launch and swam to shore. He hid under a jetty for 9 hours until it was dark, but he was caught by a security guard who treated him well but sent him back to Ellis Island, and 2 weeks later he was on a boat to Germany. But while he was on this boat back to Germany, he learned English. He must have been really smart. English is really difficult, and to learn it in 2 weeks now, probably wasn't reciting Shakespeare, but he learned enough to get by. So there was still no work in Germany, still no money, still no food. He sold everything he had, even his shirt, literally sold the shirt off of his back because he was starving. But he stowed away again, and he slept on the floor of a cabin of a friendly passenger. Doesn't say how friendly. He bumped into the same officer and discovered that and got in trouble again, and discovered that the boat had the same captain that had caught him last time. So they were all kind of ha about it. They sent him to the mailroom with a group of other stowaways. One was on try number 7. So people were desperate to get out of Germany. Sent to Ellis Island, sent back to Germany again, and he decided he'd get on an American ship this time to avoid that particular captain and official crew member. And when he got on the American ship, he went into the boiler room and he found a pile of coal, and he burrowed into the pile of coal. And I don't think probably his lungs thanked him very much for that. So he was hiding in this pile of coal for 12 hours when another guy real close beside him crawled out. He had no idea that other guy was there, and gave him some chicken and some coffee. So there were 3 other stowaways all hiding in the coal, and they all helped each other. And at the dock, before they became public with themselves, they washed off in the bathroom that belonged to the crew, and just walked off the boat with the passengers into a new life. So it finally took. Chapter 14, What Began as the American Dream. So here he is, alone in a country where he really doesn't speak the language, much. No money, no job, no home. And he walked 43 blocks to find a friend that he had written to, and discovered the guy had moved, didn't live there anymore. But a young German overheard him on the street asking about this friend and invited him to stay with him. Lucky. The next day, he got a dishwashing job at $15 a week. And after several weeks, he had enough money saved up to buy some carpentry tools. And he began repairing and doing locksmithing work in a wire factory. He made $26 a week, but it was dirty work and he didn't really like it. So because he's a carpenter, but he got a new job as a carpenter for $44 a week. That summer, he was 24, he met a young woman named Anna Schaffler, who was an immigrant and was working as a maid. He confessed his entire past to her, and she understood and forgave him, and they had a very slow courtship. They saved $2,600 and got married on October 10th, 1925. He bought an old car for their honeymoon to Los Angeles. Trying to read my abbreviations, to Los Angeles, and they decided maybe they would stay in California, but the car broke down before they even left New York. So they got an apartment, and he got a job with a Swedish contractor. Keep that in mind. In 1926, he joined the Carpenters Union. Anna got a job in a bakery, and together they made $100 a week. They were obsessively thrifty, he's remembered as, if he went out with people, which he rarely did, he let other people pay for the beer. He lent money to his friends at 6% interest. He had bought into a partnership in a lunchroom, and then he sold it for $400 profit. So he's a smart businessman. Monday, after the Wall Street crash, he withdrew $2,800 from the bank and began playing the stock market while everything was real low in value. And he actually kept his money in a trunk at home. In 3 years, he was worth $10,000 to $12,000, which is approximately $100,000 today. And we're not talking. This is like cash on hand. He gave $3,750 to a friend for a mortgage, but he charged an annual interest of $224, so that was a significant profit. He moved to a middle-income apartment in the Bronx that belonged to an uncle of some German friends. In 1931, the availability of carpentry jobs really was low. He bought a Dodge, for $737, and they took a trip to California to see his sister. He took a friend with a sister in California, so the two of them went together. This friend was called Hans Kloppenberg. They were like brothers, and they remained brothers. They camped their way across the country. They took the northern route to California, and then when they came back, they took the southern route home to New York City, and they saw the country. They were gone from July to September. They traveled 14,000 miles, and they spent $800, which actually was a lot of money, but still. In the summer of 32, which is months after the Lindbergh kidnapping, they had a new apartment upstairs in a 2-story house for which they paid $50 a month. Anna still worked at the bakery, and the owner would feed Bruno dinner with Anna every Tuesday and Thursday. It was part of her income, as he would show up at the bakery at dinner time. When he got off work and his carpentry job, he would immediately go to the bakery and sit and have dinner with them. And every Tuesday and Thursday, like clockwork. And keep in mind, the kidnapping happened on a Tuesday. So he did contract carpentry, building a garage for the Dodge on a lot next to their apartment in his free time. He got these jobs through employment agencies. He worked Tuesday, March 1st, the day of the kidnapping, from 8 a.m. to 5 o'clock. Immediately on time, picked Anna up at the bakery, and several witnesses saw him there eating at the bakery. By April the 2nd, though, and these witnesses provided an alibi. By April the 2nd, he was getting frustrated and upset that his money as a carpenter wasn't really good. And he joined his friend Hans that evening for a weekly musical evening. He played mandolin. And once again, I think this is the night that Condon gave the $50,000 to John in the cemetery. So while all that was going on, Bruno was having a musical evening with friends playing the mandolin. And there are witnesses to that. In June, Anna went to Germany to see her parents, and she didn't come back till September. No issues, she just wanted to see her parents. Bruno played the stock market at a broker's office. He would get dressed in the suit and stuff and go to this broker's office and play the stock market. Or he would go to the beach with friends. And so he was either at the broker's office with eyewitnesses all the time, and when he wasn't, he was hanging out with friends at the beach or playing the mandolin. So he wasn't left alone to his own devices counting ransom money or anything like that. On the beach, he got introduced to a guy called Isidor Fish. Now, this is an interesting character. He's a con man who was posing as an innocent fur cutter who lived humbly. Bruno was a mark for Fish. Fish knew that he had money because I guess Bruno didn't brag, but he didn't not talk about it either. And he had $15,000 and he enjoyed making easy money on the stock market, and he would talk about, investing stocks. He was kind of naive and gullible, discussing these things with people he really didn't know. In 1931, there was a business called the Knickerbocker Pie Company in New York City, and it was going broke, as many were. But it was run by two criminals. They conned Fish out of $1,000 investment in the company, and then it went bankrupt. So Fish was upset about this. Fish conned others for a total of almost $4,000. Even after this thing went broke, he was using that business that really didn't exist anymore, really wasn't generating any money anymore. He was using it to con money out of other people, getting investments. And he got upwards of $17,000 of investments from people for business that didn't work. And the German who invested, all these Germans who invested knew each other. And kind of was reassuring, But no one talked about giving money to Fish. So all these Germans were giving him money. He was conning all of them. He knew them all as a group of friends. But they somehow didn't cross-check with each other and realize they were all being conned. So he was living like this humble life, looking like he was poor, and he convinced each of them individually to keep quiet about it so nobody else would get the profit. And then the author says there might also have been an element of shame on the part of these people who were investing and then getting conned, that they don't want to talk about it. So Fish clung to Bruno like a leech because Bruno had money, and he conned him out of money by using fake proceeds from a bogus operation, like a business thing. And what is speculated now is that Fish may have bought some of this ransom money that was being sold on the black market for low prices. So, here are these illicit gold certificates, illegal because they're gold certificates and also part of a ransom, but for 40 cents on the dollar, people will do almost anything for a profit. And this Fish guy was a con artist. Bruno was conned to invest in this fur business and, stock investments in it. And he was into Fish for $17,500. But nothing was written. There were no legal contracts. Bruno brushed off warnings of his nephew. He ignored warnings of other people. He trusted Fish. Look, this poor guy is just struggling. I'm going to help him out. But Anna, his wife, and Hans, his friend, did not trust Fish. Anna had a baby, a son, November 3rd, 1933, whom they named Manfred. Fish had to go to Germany on business with friends. He bought tickets for the trip. He bought traveler's checks for the trip with the ransom money gold certificates. A ship's officer took the money, although they weren't legal, took them anyway, because it wasn't such a gigantic amount of money. He replaced them with his own cash, and he took them home to give to his wife as a gift, as like getting $2 bills or Sacagawea coins or something. It was a collector's thing. Months later, he saw Fish's name in the paper in relationship to all this illicit stuff, and he went to the police about it. The gold certificates were part of the ransom, and however this happened, they were the source of the ransom gold certificates found later in the possession of Bruno. So, even though Fish had paid for his trip already, he went to Bruno and asked for money, more money. And, Bruno said, okay, and then Fish went to other people and asked for money. So he was double, triple, quadruple dipping, basically, borrowing money from people with the same sob story. On December 2nd, the Hoffmans threw Fish a goodbye party because he was leaving, right? And at the party, he appeared ill. He was coughing and losing weight, red flag. Hans saw Fish give Bruno a box wrapped in paper and tied with string, and overheard Fish, so there's a witness to this, he overheard Fish say, "Do me a solid, keep this box for me till I get back." And saw Bruno put it in a closet. They had a closet that they, like a coat closet or something, and it was deep, it was up high, it had a high ceiling inside of it, and high up there was a shelf, and it was above everybody's heads. So if there was something on that shelf pushed to the back, it was out of sight. Out of sight, out of mind, as we're going to find out. So it got put up in this closet and forgotten about. Chapter 15, Friends and Frauds. Fish is in Germany now, with tons of money from all kinds of people. Bruno is still playing the stock market, and then Fish dies. Fish probably had tuberculosis. And in his last message, he said that he had a message for his last moments. He said he had a message for Bruno Hoffman, but he lost the ability to talk. He struggled to talk and couldn't get it across. Bruno heard about the death, and he heard about it like a month after it happened. He was asked by Fish's brother to go and get the valuables from a bank. And so when he did, he had a bank deposit and a bank account. And when Bruno went, he discovered there was no money in the bank. And he was asked to go to the warehouse and get the furs that were on store because they were expensive. And when he went to the warehouse, it was empty. So the safety deposit box was empty, the warehouse was empty, and there was no will. There was no money. So this was a huge shock. All this circle of German friends were horrified because nobody got away without losing some money to Fish. Bruno probably could withstand this blow better than most because he was a canny businessman. He was good with his money and he saved money. So it was a big loss, but he recuperated from it. He got on with his normal life and he built baby furniture. One day, while he was going into the closet to get something, he realized, the box. And he reached up and got it and opened it and found all this money in gold certificates. It had gotten wet. Apparently there was a leak in the ceiling of the closet that nobody really realized because, they couldn't see up there. So this money had gotten wet. They actually hanged it to dry. No, they didn't. They hung it to dry. People are hanged. Objects are hung. So they hung this money out to dry, and it came to a total of $14,600. They knew right away, this is not legal tender. It's against the law to possess gold certificates. And they were under the impression, this is why Fish didn't take it with him. Didn't want customs to see it. And this is why he asked us to take care of it, because Fish knew that gold certificates weren't okay. Didn't occur to them anything else. So they took a couple and spent it in places that were big public places. So the police hunt is still going on for the money. 2.5 years, they're still hunting for the ransom money. The FBI is helping them, but Schwarzkopf is obstructing the FBI. And he continued to withhold the original files on the case. The FBI couldn't get the information they needed. Schwarzkopf's assistants were worse because they were like petty, bureaucratic, big shots. They were stupid and they were territorial, and they complained often about Scotland Yard and the Mounties and the Department of Justice and the Treasury and false electors. No, I made that up. They bragged that they had orders not to share information with the New York City cops or with the FBI. It was a power trip. Keaton, a guy that was under Schwarzkopf, there's a lot of names here. I'm going to forget who they were. We did them last week, but I put this in parentheses. I must have realized I'm never going to remember who this is. So Keaton was under Schwarzkopf. He called Roosevelt, FDR, dangerous, and talked about the Department of Justice being his gang. September 30 of 34, the gold certificates started showing up. They were memorable to shopkeepers, and they were able to describe the guy that had paid with them, and it turns out that all the descriptions were the same guy. It sounded like it was the same guy. This was a lucky break. Gold certificates had numbers on them to like trace. And some of the gold certificates that they found, out of one of them, there was a penciled notation of a number from a gas station, and they're asking themselves, "Oh, okay, is this a license plate?" So they went to the gas station, and the owner remembered that the guy who used the gold certificate drove a Dodge and had an accent of some sort. And I'll tell you what else he said. So he made a note of the license number because he wasn't sure the banks were still going to accept the gold certificates when he brought them to the bank. And he said, I didn't want to get stuck. So he wanted to know who this was so he could pursue him for the money. Asked if the man had said anything about it. The guy said, yeah, I said, you don't see these things around much anymore. And he said, I only have about 100 of them left. Okay. The FBI was thrilled by the identification of a German carpenter. Remember the homemade ladder? And the problem with the ladder is that it was not adequate to hold the weight of an adult. It was crudely made, very inadequate ladder. And Bruno was an extremely skilled, trained master carpenter. So the cops were, in general, kind of cautious about how they were going to go about this. So they staked him out. They followed him, and one morning at 9:05 on the way to his stockbrokers, they pulled him over and asked, where did you get the gold certificates in your wallet? And he was nervous because he thought he was in trouble for passing illegal gold certificates and immediately started lying. So this thing just really got off on the wrong foot. He lied about the amount he had at home, and they put him in a cop car, and they said, so you're the LINDBERGH kidnapper. And he's like, what? Chapter 16, we've got the right man at last. They took him home, and they searched him, and then they took him, they searched his home. They took him to the station where there were a lot of very grim looking cops to greet him. He was put in a room and grilled. They gave him the 3rd degree. They checked his work alibi for March 1st. They got handwriting samples. They brought in his friend Hans for questioning, thinking possibly this guy is an accomplice. But the cops were immediately frustrated because these guys acted 100% innocent and completely clueless of what the cops were even talking about. Got hold of the taxi driver who had been given the ransom note for payment. But the cops said that this guy was unreliable, so they couldn't use his testimony. I don't remember what that was about, but it doesn't matter. In 1932... this is when he had gotten this gold certificate and as a taxi driver, and it was just too long ago. He said he would not be able to ID. Too unreliable. 1934, so 32, when he was questioned by the cops said, you're not reliable because you say you can't remember and we can't depend on you. 2 years later, 1934, after the cops told him, hey, we got the right man. You saw him. We're depending on you. And presented Bruno in a lineup with Bruno and then 2 gigantic cops, the guy ID'd him. This guy's name was, by the way, Peroni, the taxi driver. Bruno said he'd never seen Peroni before, and he didn't take taxis because he owned his own car. After 12 hours, he began to tell them about Fish and the con where he lost money, but he still hadn't confessed that he'd received this bag of gold certificates because he was sure that he was in big trouble for the gold certificates. He said he never read the paper because his grasp of English wasn't all that great, so he didn't realize the ransom money issue, and he did not know Betty, the maid, the nursemaid. He didn't know Violet, the housemaid who died. And he lied and said he'd never been arrested in Germany because he didn't want to get deported. At midnight, they woke up this is a weird story. They waited till midnight. They decided they'd analyze the handwriting on the ransom note. It just seems bizarre. So they woke up the 70-year-old expert handwriting analyst, but he was sick and it was the middle of the night. But his son was an amateur, like an apprentice handwriting expert. And he looked at the ransom note and he looked at samples of Bruno's handwriting and said it's not the same guy. Schwarzkopf beat Bruno to force him into doing a new writing sample, and he had also had no sleep in over 24 hours. He dictated to Bruno the actual wording of the ransom note and told him how to spell things so that it matched the misspellings in the ransom note. When he first wrote it and it was just dictated, he didn't misspell anything. But they forced him the next time to spell things wrong. The next morning, police found the money and that had been dried and hidden in the garage. And the cops called the handwriting analyst and begged him to say that it was Bruno, and he agreed. Just agreed. Bruno was confronted personally by J. Edgar Hoover. And Orion was the New York City police commissioner, so they pulled out the big guns. He told them about Fish, but he finally told them the truth about the money and everything. But after the earlier lies he told, they didn't believe anything he was saying. They checked his work alibi, and the guy at work had the wrong records of time cards and gave them the wrong information. He said, he didn't start working until March the 1st. But that's... Okay. He started working March the 1st was his first day at work, and there was a record of him clocking in, clocking out, going to the bakery, eyewitnesses of all of this. But they couldn't find the right records of the time cards, so they said, he didn't start working here until the 21st, 20 days later. That wasn't true. And they said that he had resigned after the 21st. But the truth is, he started on the 1st of March, lots of eyewitnesses, and he resigned in mid-April. They said he didn't start till the 21st of March and resigned, so he started later and quit April 2nd. So started later, quit earlier. Smaller window of working. So this would make him not working when the baby was kidnapped and quit work and not working when the ransom money was paid. And it was all untrue because there were witnesses. He was playing music. He was eating at a bakery. So the whole thing was just a tissue of lies, and they just chose to believe the lies and to ignore the truth. They had a press conference with the police and the FBI, and they were sure that he was guilty, and they showed photos of him in handcuffs and sort of poisoned the well when it came to juries. I don't know how you would get away with that today, but I guess you could, depending on who you were. Chapter 17, the shaky identification of Cemetery John. Condon, our friend Condon, there just seems to be an overabundance of con artists in this story. Condon ID'd Bruno as the guy at the Cemetery John, in a lineup that was just a big scam. It was all cops again and Bruno. I guess cops kind of looked the same in those days. I don't know. He played with the cops. Condon did. This guy's a narcissist. He played with the cops. He took his time. He questioned all the guys in the lineup one by one. And then he discovered that, only one of them had an accent. So it might be him, but he hemmed and he hawed. And then at the end of this lineup, Condon did not ID Bruno. So the cops had coerced the ID out of the taxi driver. They had confused and browbeaten the handwriting analysis guy into lying. And they had the money, so they then tried to coerce a confession. And they beat this poor guy up. I mean, it's kind of incredible that, and it's not like they kept it a secret either. So Bruno told this story. I was handcuffed in the chair and the police give me such a terrible licking that I fall downwards to the floor. They showed me a hammer and put out the lights and started to beat me on the shoulders, the back of the head, and the arms. Then, too, they kicked my legs with their feet and kept yelling, "Where's the money? Where's the baby? We'll knock your brains out." He just kept saying he was innocent. So he was examined by, his wife got an independent doctor, and he said that Bruno had on his right shoulder a tender lump 1.5 inches, a lump on the spine left of the scapula, and above it, all of his lower shoulder blade shows a swollen welt with discoloration and abrasions. In the lower abdomen, close to the groin, an area of 3 by 5 inches of faint greenish-yellow discoloration. In the upper chest, a large irregular region, discolored yellow and faint. Then it goes on to say, I conclude from this examination that he had been subjected recently to a severe beating, or at all or mostly all with blunt instruments. He was allowed no lawyer for 5 days. They tried sleep deprivation, but he would not talk. But then when he did, he lied, It's terrible. He denied how much money he had. He denied where he got it. Then he denied that he had any left. But he actually had $840 with a gun. But the cops hadn't found it yet. So, again, he denied everything. That he had never been to Hopewell, the LINDBERGH's house. That the money he got was from fish. And he lied about it because he was scared of getting in trouble for spending gold certificate money of a friend who had died. The Bronx DA was frustrated and he tried to scare him by bringing in Anna and the baby and threatening to arrest her and putting the baby in an orphanage. Still could not get a confession. So, Chapter 18, Anti-Hauptmann Hysteria. So at the scene of the abduction, they had found at least 2 sets of footprints in the mud. And they had documented 2 years earlier when this happened that they found at least 2 sets of footprints in the mud, and neither set, they took, molds or whatever. They compared it to Bruno's shoes and they didn't match. But now they were claiming, there was only 1 set because they needed to fit the narrative that he was the guilty person. But Anna had been at work at the bakery eating dinner with him on March the 1st at the time of the kidnapping, and then they went home. She knew, 100% she knew that he was innocent. His lawyer believed him. His faithful friend, Hans, believed him. When they accused him of being Cemetery John collecting the ransom money, Hans was playing music with him somewhere else entirely. So they knew that he was innocent. And obviously, evidence had been misrepresented and planted in the process of the investigations. They found phone numbers of Jaffe Condon scribbled on the closet door after the police searched. They found, they weren't there the first time, but then after the police spent the day searching, they suddenly mysteriously found them. They found Oh, they went to the closet door and dismantled it and took the whole thing away, and claimed that he had written these secret numbers on the inside of the closet door. They weren't there the first time they searched. They were planted in the days after his arrest by a guy called Cassidy. But the cops called this evidence and seized it. Cassidy, later, years and years later, bragged that it had been fake. It was not real evidence. They cooked it up. So his case was taken to a grand jury, and he was when he was interrogated by the grand jury, he was completely confused when they were talking about writing on the inside of the closet. And he said, well, if you're telling me that I did, I must have, but I don't remember doing it. That was all they needed. The cops found the money. They found the gun. They asked him, was anything else hidden? And, he just lied. They had asked him, was anything else hidden? And he had lied. And now they found this stuff. And then they asked him, well, how do you account for all of this? Well, he said he lied to avoid getting in trouble for the certificates, to get in trouble for illegal gun charges. The grand jury put forth a true bill for extortion about the ransom money because they weren't quite sure yet they had enough evidence about the kidnapping. The papers went into overdrive with anti-Hauptmann hysteria. It stoked a national fury, and it was fed by lies, just a constant stream of lies and false evidence from the police. The cops had a lot invested in the conviction, reputation, that kind of thing. They'd spent thousands of hours. They'd spent millions of dollars. This was a huge, big deal, a PR nightmare. They had no evidence to link him to the kidnapping. They had no identification that was legitimate. They had no shoe matching. They had no fingerprints. They had no confession. And the evidence they did have, the writing on the inside of the closet, it was false. And the witnesses who said, oh, yeah, I guess it was him, changed their story because originally they had no idea it wasn't him. So they had to invent this evidence. Lindbergh eventually signed his testimony that when he was sitting in his car with his back to the cemetery on the night that Condon met Cemetery John, that he heard very clearly in Hauptmann's voice say, "Hey, Doc," and he absolutely identified it. But he was sitting at a great distance with his back to the source of the voice, and Lindbergh, unbeknownst to most people in the public, was functionally deaf. They conveniently didn't mention that. His car windows were closed. They were at a long distance and his back was to the sound, but he said he'd heard it. He said it was distinct. The next day, after, being asked the first time, the next day he signed papers that he'd heard Hauptmann. So what juror was going to believe this German immigrant who jumped ship and sneaked into the United States and lied about all this other stuff, and he was this down and out, well, not poor, but, carpenter from Germany? Who was going to believe him against Lucky Lindy? And then all the other fake evidence. For example, I didn't take a whole lot of notes on this because it was just convoluted and kind of boring, frankly. But the ladder was thrown together by somebody who knew nothing about construction. It wouldn't even hold the weight of a person. It was tested, and it wouldn't. And it was made from random scrap lumber. But interestingly enough, it wasn't made from random scrap lumber that was lying around from the building of Hopewell House, Lindbergh's new house. They had all kinds of scrap lumber still on site because this is a brand new house. And it didn't get made by any of that good lumber. One of the pieces in the ladder came from the floorboards of a corner of the attic of the rental that Bruno and Anna were living in. But it was never identified as missing from the floor, the board, until the cops had spent a huge amount of time on their own faking written addresses on the door jamb, and somebody sawed a piece of wood, and it was identified later as just completely unrelated fresh piece of wood taken out of this closet. Why? And Lindbergh not only claimed he didn't do it, would have created a better ladder. He had been building a garage. He had access to all kinds of scrap lumber that would have been really appropriate to make a ladder. This wood was just this random, not the right kind of wood you would use anyway. And it had to be, this is the other thing. It was sawn off the attic floor, but then it had to be sanded and filed and messed with to get it to the right size. It's just bizarre story, trumped up evidence. So for 6 days, 27 cops made 9 trips to Bruno's attic to find evidence and found nothing. But on the 26th, 2 cops and 2 carpenters went into this inaccessible attic space, and later that day, they discovered there was a missing piece of the attic floor. And like I said, it would have had to have been planed down to make it fit after it was taken out of the attic. And Hauptmann had all this lumber in his garage, and Lindbergh's had lumber on site. So it just didn't match. It just made no sense. And also, by the way, after Bruno was arrested, they let a cop move in and live in his apartment. So who knows what they were doing. Anna later went back to this apartment and discovered that all these weird changes had been made in the closet where the package of the money had been found. The shelf had been lowered really low so that now she could see it easily when she opened the closet door. Originally, and there were people who, Hans and Anna, everybody said, this was so high up, we even forgot it was there. It was so close to this tall ceiling of the inside of the closet. All of a sudden, she opens the closet door after the cops have been living there, and it's eye level. And they painted over the original location of the shelf. But they still needed eyewitnesses that Bruno had been seen in Hopewell, at the house, March 1st. They had tons of eyewitnesses that he was elsewhere. So 2 days after the kidnapping, they talked to a neighbor of the Lindberghs, and this guy signed statements that he had seen nobody around. He saw no activity around. But they kept going at him and at him and at him, and he was really poor, and they offered him money, it turns out later. So 7 weeks later, he said, they gave him $150 a day and $35 for expenses to ID Bruno. He had a huge family and was really poor and took the money. Schwarzkopf lied that this neighbor had seen Bruno on March 1st. Now, this eyewitness neighbor, his name was Willard Whitted or Whitehead. And Schwarzkopf assigned a cop to be his bodyguard 24/7 to keep the press away from him. But he did allow the newspaper to take a picture of the witness for money. The cop got money. So New Jersey extradited Bruno after the grand jury heard from the writing expert, and they heard about the wood from the ladder when they heard from this liar neighbor. And finally, when Lindbergh said, yes, that's his voice. So he knowingly, Lindbergh was sending an innocent man to his death because New Jersey had the death penalty for murder. He'd been hugely obstructive of the search. He'd been hugely obstructive about the ransom exchange. He wanted nobody to go after trying to identify the kidnapper. The great American hero was so callous and deceitful with the life of somebody at stake And so this guy in this book talks a bit about Lindbergh being a Hitler fan and a eugenicist, and he did believe that some lives were more valuable than others. And I really recommend you listen to that channeling, because it's mind-blowing to hear the way these 1% wealthy people who are eugenicists justify their belief in their own superiority. It's quite incredible. He absolutely thought that Bruno Hoffman was a lesser human being, an illegitimate person. So all of this superiority turns out that later to be found that Lindbergh was a big, gigantic hypocrite. He had a series of illegitimate children. He had 6 children from 3 different mothers in Germany. Long marriage and 3 different girlfriends, some of them long-term relationships in Germany, and 6 illegitimate children. Maybe I'll stop here. I think I'm going to stop here because it's the end of a chapter and I've already done an hour. Just almost an hour. So, I hope you're enjoying this. The plot thickens. Wait till you hear about Lindbergh's life. And it's this whole thing, it's incredible, mind-blowing story, I believe. So, thank you for listening. Slán go fóill, sláinte.